The word self is a right muddle. Mostly when I'm talking about self, I mean the ordinary psychological self, the self that makes... I can be sitting here and it feels as though I'm inside here, looking out through the eyes, there's the world over there, there's the me in here. That's what I mean by the self. And the idea, which I think is illusory, but it's the natural way we feel, that this self has been going on since I was little and it's changed and so on, but it's still me and I'm in charge of stuff, you know, I tell my arms to move and, you know, I am the experiencer of a stream of consciousness. I think for most people, perhaps not a lot of non-dual experiences, but for most people, that's kind of where we start from with the self. I think it's a psychological construct. It's something that our brain and body throws up for interesting reasons, but it's a false model of what's going on. But that's what I mean by the self. When you get traditions where there's small s selves and big f selves, there's all sorts of other things people mean by self. God, it makes it rather hard to talk about, but that's what I mean when I'm talking about self. I think most people are happy to accept that who I am has changed through my life in the way the body changes and so on. I take a much more radical view than that. I think that selves keep popping up, but not nearly as often as we think. I would say we live most of our lives in a state of multiplicity and distraction. If you look at it from the brain point of view, and we look inside brains what's going on in brain scans and all kinds of other methods we can use, what you find, you do not find a brain which takes in information from the world, takes it all to a middle, and then, you know, causes the instructions to go out. It's not like that. It feels like that, but it isn't like that. The brain is a multiple parallel processing organ. You know, there's stuff going all over the place. Even just in the visual system back here, there are probably about 40 separate pathways, all kind of, you know, there's no coming together. There's no picture of the world with me watching it somewhere in the brain. It isn't like that in brains. Now, I think you find similar, actually, when you practice meditation for a long time or take certain drugs or whatever, you realize that it isn't this simple, everything's coming in and going out. What I think is happening is something like this. Every so often the brain throws up a self-model. Oh, here I am, I'm Sue Blackmore, I'm in here, I'm looking out there. Fine, okay, it's just a representation of this thing, you know. But then we jump on it and go, oh yeah, that's me, that's the same me it's always been, I've got my same memories, I'm the one who's been awake since I got up this morning, I've lived my life, I've had this stream of experiences going on. Oh, that's all rubbish. None of that is true. All that's true is the self's been thrown up. So that fits both with what we know in the neuroscience. It's this ephemeral self, it comes up for a bit and then disappears. And what's interesting to me is to live like that. How do you live if you believe that, oh, here I am, this is just an ephemeral thing, it's going to go away? It's somewhat similar to one half an hour ago, or one this morning, or the one meditating, or whatever, but it's not the same thing, and there wasn't any continuity either. It's just thrown up and will disappear. So I practiced accepting that, letting go when there's a self. Oh, who's this? Haha, and let it go again. You might think that there can only be one self at a time. I don't think that's true. I think there can be several. You might think that there's always some kind of continuity. I think the only continuity there is the continuity of the whole universe, if you like, out of which are flung all these things. Now, this is a body, you know, with a brain. A brain in a body in a complex world throws up representations of itself and the world and everything else all over the place, again and again. The weird thing is that when certain ones that we call self, which are modeling the body, as it were, making a story that I'm in here and all of that stuff, every time that happens we seem to be tempted into thinking that's a continuous me, that's always been me, and I don't think that's true. I think it just is another ephemeral thing. Now, what makes it seem to be continuous is because there is some continuity of this body, actually the skin falling off all the time, there's bacteria going through, it's changing fast, and it doesn't have exact boundaries either, Nevertheless, there's a continuity of information and organization to our body, so that the cells that are thrown up are kind of similar. The memories upon which they depend are kind of similar, but they're too changing, because all they are is instantiated in, movable stuff in here. It's very, very fluid and ephemeral. It's exactly like I've died and I'm inhabiting a body. Oh, how interesting! It's exactly. It is dying. It's being born again. Oh, here's somebody who's died again. Now, the fact that the same body keeps throwing up something like that means it's quite reasonable to go, aha! I feel myself to be this person here, but that's similar to previous ones and can remember things that they did and so on. But it is a kind of dying, and I actively practice that dying. Here, because you're throwing these things at me, I'm feeling there's a self here, because we're talking about it. A lot of the time it's just gone away. So I feel that, but actively say, well, let her die when she will. And what happens then, and that's part of comes with practice, is it just becomes the room. And there isn't a me sitting in the room, there's just the room and whatever's happening and whatever this body's doing, it just goes along, and it's not me and the world. And then she comes back, and it's still dying, yeah, it's like it's dying, it's being born and dying, born and dying, born and dying, yeah. Can we ever know ourselves? Well, you asked me to define self, and what is it we want to know? I think one of the most, as far as I'm concerned, or this thing is concerned, it's a lifetime of learning new things, and I don't know what I might be saying in a year might be completely different, but how it seems so far is to know myself means a lot of different things, and some of them are very mundane and quite important. I need to know my own constraints, my own strengths, my own weaknesses, be honest about them, be kind about them. I've had real problems with destructive self-criticism. I'm so bad, I'm so bad. And then I go, oh, well, I'm really good at saying, oh, no, that's really bad to say that. And all these things. So knowing yourself is partly about dealing with just, I can do this, I can't do that, I'm good at that, I'm bad at that, I'm kind in this situation, I was horrid then, okay, fine. It's that sort of self-knowledge is about knowing what we call a person who is in the world with other people. Other kinds of self-knowledge, I think the way I've been exploring what feels so strongly to be me in here in the world out there, watching that arising, as it were, and falling away is a different kind of knowing self. And then when you become a watcher and see that happening and think, who the hell's the watcher? And then that too goes away and you're back in, I suppose you would call it non-duality, seems a fancy word, but anyway, you're back in, it's just this stuff happening. Is that knowing self? And then you could say a kind of fancy thing, well, it's all self, and then the big self or something like that. I don't know. Oh, path and no path. Yes, everybody has a path, and it's their own path. It's very, very interesting and difficult, that. In a way, I can say these glib things, everybody has their own path and you have to find your own path stuff. But I think within Zen, which is where my own training lies, although I'm not a Buddhist, I don't sign up to anything, the concept of path is very interesting, because on the one hand, when you take certain steps and realize certain things, it's just kind of obvious and it doesn't look like a path at all. On the other hand, if you don't put in the hours of meditation, somehow you don't see those things. And I think that's the paradox of the path and no path. There's a lovely poem which I did a painting of, and it's on my wall and I like it. And within the Chan tradition that I've trained in. No guru, no church, no dependency. Beyond the farmyard, the wind in the trees. The fool by the signless signpost stands pointing out the way. Hell's gate is open and heaven shimmers in the mirage. Here on the mountain where the path stops, you go on into the snow alone. The great sky is totally devoid of cloud. The path in this poem, it begins as a path, but here on the mountain where the path stops, you go on into the snow alone. Is it still a path? Is it not a path? Have you got somewhere? Snow, great sky. The whole path, no path paradox comes up in the Heart Sutra. There is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. There is no wisdom or any attainment. Having nothing to attain, bodhisattvas relying on prajna paramita, so off you go. But there's that critical bit, linking suffering and path, and there's no path, no wisdom, no attainment. What? Path, no path. It's difficult. I don't know. Don't ask me such difficult questions. It sounds as though you're wanting to get rid of the paradox. And somebody said this yesterday, and I found it very helpful. Paradoxes are not to be got rid of, they're to be enjoyed, or to be explored, or to be used. I think this is a paradox not to say, oh, we got ourselves in a tangle, we should get... Some paradoxes are like that. But I think this is a paradox to learn something from, the paradox of path and no path. Because in some ways and at some times in your life, you need to do, it's a path and I'm treading it, and I'm going to do my meditation every day, or I'm going to do whatever work, is treading a bloody hard path, frankly, but at other times it's all open and it's obvious, and the path simply becomes whatever you are doing. And I think to sort of get rid of the paradox by kind of implying that it's a mistake in our language is a shame. I think it's a paradox. It's like a koan. It's worth exploring in the way that koans force you into this perplexity that opens up your mind. I really, really hate the way people use the word evolution in the context of human development. I mean, okay, perhaps we shouldn't use the word evolution strictly to apply to, evolution by natural selection, but I want to, because it's really important to understand how we got here, what kind of things we are. We evolved. Evolution does not have a direction. It does not have a goal. It does not have any design. It's a wonderful, mindless process out of which complexity, design, amazing, beautiful things come by a simple algorithm. When we talk about human development, the way we develop as people during our lives, that's not like that. The whole discussion that we're having about paths and directions and where we're going and so on is absolutely the antithesis of what evolution is about. I'm deep down a scientist, and I want to make sense of the world. And so looking at the way brains function, and the neuroscience is going so fast and so wonderfully at the moment, it's really exciting. I mean, most of my life it's been really slow. And what I'm seeing there, the mystery of consciousness. And it's really a mystery, and I give lectures called The Mystery of Consciousness. It's a mystery in the sense that we don't even know how we should be thinking about it or what we're looking for. That is a kind of indicator that there's something deeply wrong with what we're doing. The whole hard problem of consciousness seems to me, there can't really be a hard problem. I mean, a hard problem you could solve. The hard problem is an indicator that we're completely and utterly confused about the whole thing. So, why? Because it appears dual. It appears there's a brain that we can study and we can look at and so on, and then there's this. How on earth can this be, or be related to, or be produced by, or what? I mean, any word you use is going to throw you into a muddle and a confusion, because dualism doesn't work for any number of reasons that have been explored over thousands of years. How can it be then? Understandably, science has ignored, try to push away consciousness because it's too difficult, and a whole lot of spiritual people do what I call consciousnessism. Instead of materialism, they'll do consciousnessism, who push away matter. You know, neither works. So here's a big clue to me, a big clue that science, the neuroscience, is telling us we've got something fundamentally wrong. Somehow this has got to be all one, and we can't see how. Well, that's only the same endeavor that goes on in the meditation practice, of seeing that it feels as though I'm over here and the world's out there, but it can't be, you know? And that encourages me to keep going with both, and that's essentially what I'm trying to do. Struggle on with the problem of dualism in science, struggle on with the problem of dualism as it keeps arising within experience. And I think in the end they're the same problem, and somehow, but I'm not going to just go, oh, it's a mystery, well, stop there. No, I'm going to go, the thing about mysteries is you want to have a go at them. Even if you know, get like the number of wrong paths I've gone on the way, I could, you know, I couldn't count them, there are too many, but, you know, mystery is the wonderful spur to carrying on. There is a tendency for people to kind of put, you know, the mystical stuff as Eastern and the scientific stuff as Western. I've enjoyed a couple of papers here, particularly one on Parmenides yesterday, about, well, Parmenides, Western thinker, one of the sort of founders of Western thought, was saying similar things to Advaita and Vedanta, and William James and other people have come up in the Western tradition saying things that people go, ooh, that's Eastern, and vice versa, and good, you know, because they're handy labels if you like, but humans throughout history, as far as we know, have been struggling with, you know, who am I, what it's all about, and yes, there are differences in different parts of the world, but that's not fundamental. Subjectivity and empirical science really haven't come together, and perhaps they will, but there's so much quantum garbage about, and I'm not really angry about it in the way that I used to get angry about false claims of paranormal phenomena, but an awful lot of people talk about quantum mechanics and they don't know what they're talking about. Not that I know better, I'm not a mathematician or a physicist either, but these loose kind of analogies between entanglement and non-local action and so on. And it's turned into a kind of industry. There's an awful lot of people who feel that somehow, oh, it's really cool to talk about quantum effects and so on. Nevertheless, in all that mess, I think there's some sort of clues here, in particular when you go to the very enormous, the vast, the entire, you know, whatever, universe or multiverses if you prefer or whatever, or you go to the very small, you hit problems of it depends how you look at it, which of course is what we hit in inner exploration. I also think you get this, these ephemeral selves that I've been talking about, and consciousness. When I often say about consciousness, if you ask, am I conscious now? You always are. It's kind of, the question itself provokes the thing to appear, and we then falsely think we were all the rest of the time when actually we weren't. And this is another kind of, this is a sort of analogy, if you like, to, it depends how you look at it, and depends what question you ask, which you also find in quantum effects. And so, you know, there's little clues here, there's something, but I think most of what we're doing is just most of that's just a kind of big muddle. It'll clarify, maybe, I don't know. There's a very common assumption in neuroscience that we are conscious of some things and not conscious of others. I mean, it seems so obvious, doesn't it, until you really think about it. The idea that, you know, of all this massive information here, well, you know, the brain's processing a whole lot, it's throwing away a whole lot, and even less gets into consciousness. Now, this has got to be wrong. I mean, go back to 1991, Dan Dennett's fantastic book, Consciousness Explained, which people say is Consciousness Explained Away. I don't think so. I think he's really getting at the heart of the problems we have. As soon as we imagine that the brain has a whole lot of unconscious processes and then some little special conscious ones, all we've done is kind of shift the hard problem from everywhere to just this little bit. It doesn't help at all. And actually, I think it just mires us more in confusion. The whole gist of where I'm going is saying consciousness is an illusion. I don't mean there's nothing there. I don't mean there's not a problem. I mean, we've got it fundamentally wrong. And thinking that some brain processes are conscious and some aren't is part of the illusion. It's the easy thing we think into, and it's not so. So what do I replace that with? I replace that with, every so often when I ask the question, am I conscious now, or what is consciousness, or whatever question that directs me in that way, then there seems to be a problem. The rest of the time there isn't. The rest of the time there's just a brain doing its stuff. The brain is a massive parallel processing system, just unbelievably large amounts of information going through, most of it being thrown away. You know, there's bits directing these, and there's decision making going on, or it's a decision making machine. There's constant choices and decisions being made. The concept of consciousness doesn't add anything. I think it's just an after-the-fact, ephemeral thing to do with language and to do with the way we want to be. We want to have an illusion there's somebody in here. There isn't. It's just ephemeral models of self popping up and falling away, I think. I think it's obvious that free will has to be part of the illusion, and yet the majority of people believe in free will. What could free will possibly be? Something like there's a me in here, and I sort of, using my consciousness, or I consciously intervene. Consciousness, subjectivity, affects brain cells. Duh. No. Somehow it seems to me to be honest about the way the world works and to take seriously what we know, free will has to be an illusion. In other words, a false story that we tell about ourselves. So why am I, this body, here now? Well, an email came, I thought interview, shall I, shan't I, yeah, okay, fine, it's not meant to take too long, whatever thoughts went on. That's not me consciously deciding anything. It's a clever brain in a clever body in a complicated world coming to that decision for whatever reasons it did. These words coming out now, they're being said. They're not being said because I am consciously choosing to say them. They're being said because of all the genes and memes and environment in which this thing has lived all this time leading up to this moment. What does that say about responsibility, about the legal system, about all the way we treat people? It's very, very interesting. You see, in some ways, it makes compassion so much easier. Because if I just think that you're a machine, a clever, amazing, wonderful, living machine that is doing what it has to do as part of a whole universe, then I don't have to sort of forgive you for something bad you might do or praise you for something good. I just, I would joy with your joy and upset with your upset, whatever, because we're all just in it together, just inextricable parts of this stuff that's happening. Now, maybe that's tricky, but then what about... But that's okay. I'm happy to live with that. That's how I've lived for a long time. I mean, as a teenager, I thought there can't be free will. I practiced very, very hard to drop the illusion. I mean, I might be wrong. I might be forcing away something that's really true. But I live without believing in free will. Let this thing do its stuff. When you come to the legal system, it's interesting because people say things, oh, we couldn't have a legal system at all, and what about responsibility? Well, of course we could have a legal system. We would have to take away the whole idea that we're punishing people because they're bad and the kind of retribution. But we would still have, in a legal system without free will and without consciousness, all this messy stuff that doesn't help, these illusions that don't help, we would still say, okay, some people have to be locked up to keep them off the streets because they're genuinely dangerous. Few really serious things. But we would still have some kinds of punishment to act as deterrent, either to stop that person doing that thing again or to stop other people doing it in the first place. But our whole approach would be very different. So when somebody comes to court having done something awful, you know, instead of saying, are they mentally capable, were they conscious, you know, and all that, because I don't think it means, it would be, what would be the consequences of punishing this person? If the consequences are because they're an intelligent, alert kind of person, that actually that might put them off doing it again, it's worth doing it. And if they're not capable of learning anything from it, then there's no point doing it. I think we'd still have a legal system, but it would just have to shift a bit. I hope we'll go that way, because it's very important. You see, the way the neuroscience is going, it's a kind of creeping, if you take our existing system, there's a sort of creeping feeling of, well, we'll excuse them because of that, we'll excuse them because of that, oh, it's their genes, or it's their memes, or it's their, you know, they get out of it. We wouldn't need any of that if we got rid of the whole concept of free will or the relevance of the power of consciousness, those things which I think are illusions. We could actually have a much, much more positive, helpful, rational legal system that I think might work a lot better. We're a long way off that, but you know, one hopes. What I'd really like to see is a coming together of science and spirituality where each can enjoy the other, if you like. Because what's happened in my lifetime is I started out as a scientist doing experiments, trying to look for the paranormal, because I thought it was there, and then not finding it and deciding it's not. But you know, as a scientist doing experiments and so on, in my kind of spare time or private time, I was learning. I trained as a witch, and I read the tarot cards and all those kinds of things before I stumbled across Zen, and found that actually simple sitting, looking into one's own mind, learning to calm the mind, learning to look, was a lot more helpful. But they were like separate things. But during my lifetime, they kind of came together, and my whole work, my scientific work, my writing and everything else is kind of linked with my drug experiences, psychedelic experiences, my meditation and so on. They came together in that sense. But also over my lifetime, the science has come to be ever more and more relevant, what we're learning about how the brain works and so on. And what I think is, actually, I think the reason why I'm here at all at this conference on non-duality is because that word seems really meaningful to me, in the sense that dualism is the problem for the science of consciousness, and dualism is the problem for one's own personal practice in who we are and what it's all about. Now surely, if two fundamentally different ways of trying to understand the world are facing the same problem, they should be partners. That's what I'm hoping they will be.